The Norman and Florence Brody Family Foundation is dedicated to exploring topics of national and international importance and is proud to support Policy Watch with Doug Besheroff at the University of Maryland. From the University of Maryland, this is Policy Watch with Doug Besheroff.
Iran and North Korea seem to be developing nuclear weapons and the capability to launch them, raising our concerns of another nuclear arms race. Joining us to discuss the dangers of nuclear proliferation and what to do about it is Steve Fetter, Dean of the University of Maryland School of Public Policy. He is an international security policy expert for both the Defense and State Departments. And now, the host of Policy Watch, Doug Besheroff.
Steve Fetter, welcome back to Policy Watch.
Thank you.
Steve, you are Dean of the School of Public Policy here at the University of Maryland.
Yes.
And the school, I teach there as well, has a large program on international security. And one of your specialties is arms control and nuclear proliferation. Before I ask you all sorts of questions about today, when did you get started in this field, and how did you get started?
Well, I got interested in this as a student in physics at MIT in the late 1970s. There were a lot of faculty at MIT, some of whom had participated in the Manhattan Project, but who felt a responsibility, a personal responsibility for nuclear weapons and preventing their use and preventing their spread to other countries. And
preventing their use by everyone, including the U.S.
Exactly, by anyone. And I suppose they infected me with that sense of responsibility.
And this was what years?
1977 to 1981.
Was it still a fear that the U.S. would use nuclear weapons?
Oh, yes.
How so?
In fact, well, that was at the height of the Cold War, especially after the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979. U.S.-Soviet relations became very poor. And when Ronald Reagan came into office, there was a lot of talk of nuclear confrontation, of the need to build up our own arsenals of nuclear weapons and to not only the size, but to improve the quality. And I think there was a sense of danger during that time that nuclear war might break out between the U.S. and the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk specifically about nuclear proliferation. The last time you were on the show, we were talking about different forms of energy that might forestall or limit global warming. And I think you told us that nuclear energy was about mankind's, the species as you called it, best hope for the future.
Well, I think it is. I think it's one of the main hopes for addressing the problem of climate change.
But with it, right, comes a much heightened danger of proliferation?
Oh, that is the worry. And in fact, it is the thing that I worry about most when I think about a large-scale expansion of nuclear power worldwide. Because many of the technologies that are used in nuclear power can be abused for military purposes, for building nuclear weapons.
I think I've heard you say that the Defense Department did some experiments to try to see if two Ph.D.s in a garage could come up with a bomb. Can you tell us about that?
That is correct. It was an experiment that I think Los Alamos conducted, and I think it was the late 1960s or early 1970s.
That early?
They hired, I think it was initially 3, but one dropped out, 2 postdoctoral students, physicists, who they put in a trailer and said, design a bomb. And if you'd like us to do a calculation on a computer, just tell us what calculation you would like us to do for you. And they were successful.
In fact, they were so successful, they upped the ante and said, no, let's build a different kind of bomb as well.
Well, initially they thought of the easiest type of bomb to produce, which is the kind that we dropped on Hiroshima, which is a so-called gun-type weapon. It's particularly simple because high-enriched uranium can be formed into a nuclear weapon simply by bringing 2 masses of high-enriched uranium together in a gun, for example, using one piece as the bullet and the other piece at the end of the barrel.
The basic science of this is well known.
Yes.
If this is PhD students, that means it's on the internet and so forth. So What do I need besides 2 Ph.D. students to make a bomb?
Well, you need the nuclear material, and that really is the limiting ingredient for nuclear weapons.
And that's what these reactors make.
Exactly, or the technologies that are used to produce fuel. There are two basic materials, plutonium and high-enriched uranium. High-enriched uranium is especially worrisome because it can be used in this much simpler type of gun-type weapon. And the concern there is that the same technologies that are used to produce low-enriched uranium
as
for
in
the
electrical
fuel,
power.
Exactly, for the fuel for a nuclear reactor, those exact same technologies can be used to produce highly enriched uranium for a nuclear bomb.
And so if I'm doing site inspections, I can't tell the difference unless I'm there and I'm watching them reprocessing and reprocessing.
Well, for the fuel production, you can verify that they're producing low-enriched uranium so long as you're there on site. You can have monitors that are confirming that no high-enriched uranium is being produced or, in fact, has ever been produced. So that's not the concern. The concern is that someone might decide to break out of that agreement, to expel the inspectors, and to turn this facility into the production of high-enriched uranium. The concern is also that once I know how to make this facility, this enrichment facility, I can go and make a secret facility in a place that the International Atomic Energy Agency and its inspectors don't know about. And those facilities are very difficult to detect.
So originally there was a nuclear club of 4 countries: the U.S., Great Britain, France, and of course the Soviet Union. And then something happened.
And, well, in 1964, I believe, China joined the nuclear club. And that was a shock to the system. But an even larger shock came in 1974 when India detonated a nuclear weapon using plutonium from a reactor that it had acquired from Canada under the Atoms for Peace program. This reactor had been provided for civilian purposes. And before I was talking about the problem related to the abuse of the fresh fuel. In this case, in any nuclear reactor, plutonium is created. And when the spent fuel is discharged, you can separate that plutonium from the spent fuel and use that to build a nuclear weapon. And that's precisely what India did. And so this stimulated an effort, an international effort, to create a treaty for the nonproliferation of nuclear weapons.
And this is the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty?
Yes, which took effect in 1970.
And help us with the provisions. Countries, in effect, promise what, and what do they get in return?
Well, the nuclear countries, the 5 that you mentioned, they agreed not to assist any other countries in acquiring nuclear weapons. And all other countries who signed the treaty agree not to acquire nuclear weapons and to put all of their nuclear activities under safeguards of the International Atomic Energy Agency.
The Indians never signed that treaty, if I remember correctly.
No, and neither has Pakistan or Israel.
So these countries that develop those countries that develop nuclear weapons were not actually violating a treaty provision. And I take it
that's right.
North Korea just opted out of the treaty at some point, is that right?
Well, North Korea was trying to cheat on the treaty. It had been a party to the treaty, and it was trying to cheat and fool the inspectors, and it didn't. The inspectorate did determine that North Korea was producing plutonium, and North Korea responded by withdrawing from the treaty.
There are, as you suggested, a number of countries that have had nuclear weapons, or at least the capacity in this period. Israel. Do we know about when Israel developed a bomb? This is a big... The Israeli government simply does not admit that it has the bomb.
That's correct. But probably in the late 1960s, it built its first workable bombs, and most people assume that today Israel has a stockpile of 100 or some hundreds of nuclear weapons.
And did South Africa have the bomb?
Yes, South Africa developed I think about 8 nuclear weapons, simple gun-type weapons of the type I described earlier. This was in the apartheid era in the late 1970s and early 1980s.
And they were for what purpose?
Well, that was never quite clear when South Africa announced to the world that it had built these weapons and had dismantled it in the transition from apartheid to a majority-elected government. They said that their policy had been to detonate one as a demonstration should there be any foreign interference in South Africa's policies.
So, Israel, South Africa, who else? Who that does not admit that they have a bomb? Is there anyone else that we think has a bomb?
Well, India and Pakistan now both admit that they have nuclear weapons. Israel is the only country that has nuclear weapons that does not admit it. I suppose in the case of North Korea, it's unclear. North Korea did conduct a nuclear test, though, that was successful to some extent. So by doing that, they admitted that they have nuclear weapons. Although I'm not at all sure what state those are in. Are they actually usable? Could they be delivered to South Korea or Japan? We're worried, of course, now that Iran may be building.
Before we get to, I want to set the stage a little bit more.
Yes.
One does not have to be a nuclear, one does not have to have a nuclear bomb to be, for all intents and purposes, a nuclear power.
To be nuclear capable, to have a nuclear option.
So Japan has that. Is that.
Well, there are dozens of countries.
Well, let's talk, which countries have this option, and then what does it mean to be capable? Does that mean that in 3 months or 6 months they can create a bomb? Is it that? Which countries are those?
Well, first I should say that there have been many countries over the years, by some counts 20, that have at some point considered building nuclear weapons and have decided not to. Many of those countries are what you would now call nuclear-capable countries. They have the technical expertise. They have the facilities. In some cases, they even have stockpiles of nuclear materials. And if they chose to build a nuclear weapon, for example, if Japan or Belgium or Germany decided to build a nuclear weapon, they could build a nuclear weapon in a matter of months. So,
under a year. When you
under
say
a
months.
year.
Under a year.
As you pointed out before, the knowledge of how to build a bomb is not secret. The limiting ingredient is the material, the technologies that are used to make those weapon materials, plutonium and high-enriched uranium. And there are, perhaps 20 countries that have the technical know-how and expertise to build nuclear weapons.
So before we talk about Iraq and Iran and North Korea, to put this in context, if we lose control of proliferation, if there is, and I'm not saying there necessarily would be a domino effect, we could very quickly see a world with many nuclear powers.
Yes, and this was especially the fear in East Asia when North Korea was pursuing or is pursuing its nuclear program, that the building and deployment of nuclear weapons by North Korea might trigger South Korea to do the same thing, and then perhaps Japan or Taiwan. And in this way, it could be spread almost like an infection. And the same in the Middle East, where today just Israel has nuclear weapons. But if Iran should get nuclear weapons, then who would be next? Would Saudi Arabia get nuclear weapons?
Is Saudi Arabia on that list of 20 countries that is nuclear capable?
Well, no, not today. But there is a concern that if Iran did take this step, that Arab countries might also want to have nuclear capability.
Now, you have said in other circumstances that if it hadn't been for the first Gulf War, Saddam Hussein would have the bomb by now.
I'm afraid that's right, that when the Gulf War was over, the U.S. sent teams, the IAEA sent teams, as well as the UN, sent teams into Iraq to inspect Iraq's nuclear facilities, and found to their surprise that Iraq was much further along in developing nuclear weapons than we or the IAEA had thought. In fact, Iraq had gotten very good at duping inspectors in, for example, not giving them access to certain facilities, to leading them in other directions. And probably if Iraq had been allowed to proceed in that program for another 2 years, I think there's a good chance that Saddam Hussein would have had access to nuclear weapons.
Well, we won't get into the state of our intelligence after that, but we now are faced with the possibility that Iran will become a nuclear power. And the Bush administration said it was committed to preventing this. And then comes the national intelligence estimate. This is from the CIA and the intelligence agencies as a whole, which seemed, for the popular media at least, to cast doubt on whether Iran was seriously going nuclear. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I think the way the summary of the NIE, and I should emphasize it was just a summary, was quite unfortunate, because while that conclusion was perhaps true, that Iran had suspended its program to build an actual nuclear weapon, I think it missed the point, because Iran continues to have a program to enrich uranium, to develop this uranium enrichment facility. And there's absolutely no legitimate justification for that facility. Iran claims that it wants to produce fuel for its nuclear reactor, but in fact, under its contract from Russia, it must buy all the fuel from Russia. So the only explanation for this program, this uranium enrichment program, is that Iran wants to have a nuclear weapons option.
And they're getting some help from other countries on this, right?
Well, in fact, the technology, the uranium enrichment technology itself, came from A.Q. Khan, who was the developer of the Pakistani nuclear weapons program. A.Q. Khan had in turn worked for a European consortium, Urenco, that enriches uranium, and he had learned how to design centrifuges there, took that knowledge back to Pakistan, and then spread this knowledge throughout the world.
Now, did he spread it for money or just?
Apparently, yes. Apparently, partly for personal profit, perhaps partly for ideology. But it's believed that he gave not only the blueprints, but in fact starter kits, examples of the technology, the centrifuges, to North Korea. We know he gave this to Libya, because Libya turned all of this over to the United States, to the IAEA, and to Iran.
Now, I've never been to Pakistan, but my impression of Pakistan is that it's not a tremendously modern country. How did it have the industrial or technical infrastructure? Did it have one to build a bomb?
Well, I think the moral of that story is that if a country, almost any country, is really committed to build nuclear weapons, that they can find the necessary technical expertise in order to pull it off.
Someplace else in the world, and somehow bring it to
Well,
them.
certainly if you have help.
Yeah.
If you have other countries giving you the blueprints, that makes it so much simpler. But I do think that I'm afraid that the technical know-how is not very high.
Well, I'm not technically, but these tubes, the famous Saddam's, I take it that these are
yes.
machine tool things that are not that easy to fabricate. Is that right? So you need some kind of industrial.
Yes, and you need to take care. I understand that it came out that the Iranian centrifuges were failing, partly because people were assembling them with their bare hands. And they spin at such very high velocities that even the grease from your fingerprints can unbalance them and tear them apart. So you do need a very high level of attention to detail. But modern equipment, say for machining these tubes, is available in the marketplace. And although there are attempts to control it, as you can see in the case of Iran, it's hard to be 100% successful.
Then we have this other trend, which is a fear about global warming and emissions of carbon gases, and therefore a heightened interest in nuclear power. This does not seem like the right policy mix for the future. How do we get out of that?
Well, I do worry if we try to greatly expand global nuclear energy under the current framework, because we would, I think, have more and more cases like Iran, where a country would claim that it's simply interested in producing fuel for a civilian reactor, when really it would be creating a nuclear weapons option. In fact, the Director General of the IAEA, Mohammed al-Baradei, had said any country that has these technologies, enrichment for producing fresh fuel, reprocessing for dealing with spent fuel, any such country is a virtual nuclear weapon state. And we can't tolerate greatly expanding the number of virtual nuclear weapon states. But I do think that there are possible ways of keeping the risks manageable.
What are they?
Well, I see basically two different paths. One is to place greatly increased reliance on international institutions. And this actually harkens back to the Baruch Plan, which was created at the very dawn of the nuclear age. It was the first resolution introduced in the UN, which said all dangerous nuclear activities, including for civilian purposes, will be controlled by an international nuclear authority. And so you could conceive of a world where these dangerous activities, enrichment and reprocessing, would only be carried out in a few select cases, a few select areas under careful rules.
You could, I can't.
Well, I confess that I have a hard time thinking of this happening in the current political environment, and so that's why, in fact, I think that changes in U.S. nuclear weapons policy, and in fact nuclear weapons policy of all of the nuclear powers, has to be part of this. The one thing that I think could dramatically change the environment of this conversation is if the United States and the other nuclear weapon states said, we take seriously that the ultimate goal is prohibiting nuclear weapons, that no one should have nuclear weapons, and that in fact we, the United States, can't do this unless all of these sensitive nuclear activities are tightly controlled. I think that's probably the one thing that might change the conversation enough so that this would be politically feasible.
But I suppose I'm more a believer in technological fixes. There is a technological fix here as well. Perhaps. And one that I am particularly intrigued by is the possibility of small sealed core reactors with very long lifetime. That as a technical matter, it's possible to produce a reactor that is also much safer than current reactors, much safer to operator error, and small enough to be shipped to a remote site, say in a developing country, even a country that we're concerned about its proliferation possibilities. And it would operate for its entire lifetime, 30 years. So it would be shipped to the site with a full load of fuel, and then at the end of its lifetime it would be shipped back to the supplier. And so there would be no need for that country to have any capability to produce its own fuel, to deal with its own spent fuel. And the beauty of this concept from a technical point of view is that this is only workable if the economies of scale are favor mass production. So this is only workable if you have just a few producers who are producing hundreds of these reactors per year. What can we expect in the next few years? It looks as if the Iranians do want to have a bomb. Is there any way to bribe them into not having one?
Well, I'm not sure that the Iranians have decided that they want a bomb, or that all Iranians or all Iranians that matter have decided. I think what they've decided is they want an option for a nuclear bomb. And so it's important for them to take, it's important for us to persuade them not to take that next step, because it looks as if we're not going to prevent them from getting the option. They're moving forward with this uranium enrichment facility. I have not seen anyone propose any kind of realistic option for getting them to give that up. And I do think that by engaging them, perhaps we can keep this program small, we can keep it under safeguards, we can watch it very carefully, we can make sure that there are always inspectors there, and through that get a better idea if there might be a hidden program. We could also perhaps address their deeper concerns, because if they want a nuclear weapons option, it's to deter us, mainly, I think. It's because they're concerned about the possibility that the United States might take military action against them.
If we don't achieve those ends that you just described, whether they become just nuclear capable or actually produce a bomb, then it's your judgment that the rest of the Middle East begins looking for a bomb as well. Sunni Arabia.
Well, yes, our nonproliferation problem, I think, becomes a lot more complicated and a lot more difficult.
That is a sober note on which to end this program, but I've learned so much today from you, and I hope our audience has too. Steve Fetter, Dean of the School of Public Policy, University of Maryland, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Doug.
And to our audience, please, if you have comments or questions or suggestions, please feel free to write to us at policywatch@umd.edu. That's UMD for University of Maryland.edu. And for now, this is Doug Besheroff for Policy Watch. Thank you very much.
This program was produced by the University of Maryland, which is solely responsible for its content.